So let's take a look, first of all, at what we're going to be covering today. Well, first of all, we're going to be taking a look at document authentication and visa processing. So these are the bread and butter sections of getting ready for going to China. The first things that you are going to need to do. Many of you who are going to be watching today and many of you who are going to be watching tomorrow or in the pursuing days, if you've missed today, as many of you emailed me to do so, will be in this process at the moment at various stages. I do apologise if I am going over old ground with what I cover, but I will try to keep it as fresh and as engaging as possible for everyone. It's important to note as well that we do have a little chat box just on the side. You can feel free to ask any questions you like whatsoever, anything at all, and we will cover that today. We're going to be taking a look at pre-departure preparation, which includes packing, insurance, and flights as well. So we'll be going over all the information that you need to know when it comes to getting these vital aspects sorted before you leave. We'll be talking about arrival in China, so what to expect when you get to China, what's going to happen once you arrive, and we'll also be going over a few bits and pieces to do with culture shock, some of the challenges that you might face upon arriving in China for the first time, and how you might overcome those challenges. But let's program. Now, as part of the Teach China graduate program, you're going to be going out as part of a cohort of other teachers, many of whom are in exactly the same boat as you, going to China for the first time. Some of you may have China experience, some of you may have language experience, some of you may have been to China multiple times and know the score, but many of you will be going for the first time, and many of you will actually be going to live and work abroad for the first time as well. And with this come a degree of challenges. For our Teach China graduate program, pre-departure training, we are going to be going over all the challenges that relate to teaching, that relate to culture. But today, we're really going to be focusing on those challenges that you're going to have before you leave for China and also once you arrive in the country. So let's take a look, first of all, at pre-departure. Now, there are several different phases to pre-departure. There's, first of all, ensuring that you have all the documents that you're going to require. These include making sure you pass your degree and get your certificate there, as well as ensuring that you order and collect your DBS or your criminal record check from your home country, and also that you attain a 120-hour TEFL qualification. Now, a 120-hour TEFL qualification is required for the majority of teaching roles under the Teach China graduate program. 120 hours in terms of a TEFL certificate is the global standard and is also the standard for China. But some of you, if you have a degree in education or in English, may not need to get one of these. Now, a 120-hour TEFL qualification can be attained through one of Opportunity China's TEFL partners. These TEFL partners are fully accredited to offer TEFL certificates and programs that are accepted and recognised in the People's Republic of China. If you're in the United Kingdom, we work with TEFL UK. And if you're outside the United Kingdom, we work with the International TEFL and TESOL Training Company. You can find information on these and discounts from them by going to the Opportunity China homepage and selecting the TEFL option on the slider on our homepage, and you'll find a huge amount of information on these and how to attain them. Now, one very important step of going to China is ensuring you have your documents collated and authenticated. You're going to need to have your degree certificate. You're going to also need to have a no criminal record check. So this would be a basic DBS check if you are in England or in Wales, a check from Disclosure Scotland, a basic check from Disclosure Scotland if you're in Scotland, perhaps a state police check if you are in the United States, a check from the Royal Mounted Guard if you are in Canada, a Garda check if you are in Ireland. Again, we have full information on exactly what is required on our website. You're also going to need to have a TEFL certificate, as I mentioned earlier, unless your degree is in English or in an education-related subject. Let's take a quick little look at the authenticating documents page on the Opportunity China website. Now, the authenticating documents page on the Opportunity China website is an absolute wealth of information, and we heavily recommend that you utilize it. The Opportunity China website has a lot of very useful information, not least this page. So for authenticating your documents, one moment. So for authenticating your documents, if you are in the United Kingdom, you are going to need to, first of all, arrange for your degree certificate to be taken to a public notary or a solicitor in the UK. In the UK, a public notary or solicitor will be able to help you in ensuring you receive what's called a letter of attestation. This letter will be affixed to the document that you wish to have notarized. You will also need to arrange for your degree certificate to be notarized at the public notary as well. Now, if you're in the UK and you're applying for a DBS, you can follow this useful link here on the home page to the requested DBS check. You can see here it costs £23. You can also have a link here for applying to the equivalent check if you're in Scotland or if you are in Northern Ireland. It's a very simple process. You just click Start Now and you can get on with doing that straight away. Now, once you have got your DBS check and you've taken your degree certificate, DBS and TEFL to a public notary to receive your letter of attestation, you will then want to ensure that you certify your DBS. So your DBS can either be taken with your degree certificate and TEFL certificate to a public notary, or your DBS can be sent back to the disclosure barring service to have a signature or a stamp affixed to it to recognise that it has been notarized. Now, sending this back, you need to give them notice. So the best option for this is to talk with the DBS service on their website via their web chat and let them know that you want to send it back to receive a signature. And ask for the address that you can do this with. Now, they're not legally obliged to do this for you, so it's often very good to practice some good manners whilst you're doing it, but more often than not, they'll be able to do that, and that will actually save you a little bit of money on getting it initially notarized by a public notary. You'll also want to, once they have been notarized, have your degree, TEFL certificate, and DBS check apostilled and legalised by the Foreign Commonwealth Office. So you can go to gov.uk on this link here, again in the Opportunity China guide, and it tells you all about how to get your documents legalised. Now, what you'll want to do is just fill in a bit of information on this page for each of the documents. So you need to let them know each of the documents that you want to legalise. You'll need to legalise each document one at a time. So you can start a standard application here. They're £30 per document, and you go to check your documents. You search for a document using this little handy bar here. Many of the top searches are already on here. So degree certificate, you can select that. Degree transcript or certificate, you can select that. Make sure you have one there. And again, you get onto a little page here where you describe it a little bit more. So once you have your degree certificate notarized, you'll have a true copy made. So when you're applying for it to be legalized, you'll want to select a photocopy of your degree certificate or transcript. It works quite the same for the other documents, but they are a little bit different. So I'll just quickly show you. So if you have a DBS document, a disclosure and barring service document, you just type that in there, select it, continue. And here again you have your original disclosure barring service document signed by an official of the issuing authority. So this is if you've had it sent back and had it signed. And if it hasn't had that, then you want to select this second option. So if you've had it notarized by your public notary, you'll select the second option, your original disclosure barring service document without a signature from an official of the issuing authority, and it'll give you an option to have that there as well. Now, for your TEFL certificate, you will want to select educational certificate. So it's a little bit of a broad one here. And again, much like your degree certificate, with the education certificate, you will want to select your original education certificate, or a photocopy of your education certificate, as a true copy will be made by the notary or solicitor who has conducted your check. So you'll want to apply it to each of these sections once you've done that. Now, once you have completed that, you will need to go on to the Visa for China Service Center website. So the Visa for China Service Center website you can access quite easily, and if you apply on there, if you go to Visa for China, and it's visaforchina.org. You can see it just here. So if you type it just in, visaforchina.org, you can access the main page, which shows the countries that have Visa for China centers in them. Now, it used to be that you would have your documents legalized and authenticated at the Chinese embassy if you're in the UK. Now you actually get it done at the Visa for China Centre, in the same place where you're going to have your visa completed. So let's, for example, select London here. And on here you can see a step-by-step guide for both visa and authentication, and also a quick access guide for visa and authentication. So make sure you follow this guide, click authentication on the step-by-step guide and follow that very carefully. Once you've done that, if you go to quick access and select authentication, this will give you an option to book an appointment at the Visa for China Centre. This is very much the same for all UK Visa for China centres. You will be able to simply register in here and book an appointment through here. So once you have that appointment booked, you'll want to bring your documents, all 3 documents, with you to the Visa for China Centre and receive the final stamp of authentication from them on there. And what you'll end up having will be a letter of attestation, and on the back of it you will have these 2 documents here, these 2 small stickers here. The one at the top is an apostille from the issuing authority, so from the FCO, or if you're in America, from the State Department, and underneath that you will have, no matter what country you are from, a stamp of authentication from the Chinese embassy. So all of these documents are required. Now, once you have got all of these documents, you'll need to send them to your school in China. But if you don't want to go through all of these steps, there are notary services that are available to complete all of these steps on your behalf. You can contact us, info@opportunity-china.com, for more information on these services, and we can put you in touch with them. These services will be able to do all 3 of these steps. So they will be able to notarize your documents, they'll be able to legalize your documents with the relevant State Department, and they will also be able to go to the embassy and get the stamps of authentication to be put on each of these documents as well. So this is a full process where they will be able to take care of absolutely everything for you. This is quite a good option for you if you want to spend a little bit of money and don't want to go traveling, as sometimes it can be quite expensive to get all of this arranged and done yourself if you live far away from a Visa for China centre or from an embassy. Now, before you leave for China, you're also going to need to have your medical check done. So for your medical check, you'll want to make an appointment at your local surgery clinic or with your local GP. You'll want to make clear when making your appointment that you want to complete a medical form for living and working abroad. You may even want to mention that it is for China specifically as well. You want to ask the doctor to fill in as much as possible. So this is a common mistake a lot of people make, is when they go to the doctor's happy to fill out the form for them for free, but what they're not happy to do for free are these very expensive tests that this form automatically asks for them as well. Things like the chest x-ray, the ECC, laboratory exams. When it comes to getting this done for China, you just need to get as much done as possible. So you can actually have the doctor write in those boxes that they didn't conduct these tests, just so long as much is done as is possible. You want to attach a passport-size photo to the designated point at the top and ask for the surgery to stamp both at the bottom where it says official stamp on the final page, but also to stamp on the page and above the picture as well once that's been completed. That's very important. So remember, you don't need to have all of that document fully completed and signed off, but you do need to have as much done as possible, and you need to have the doctor's signature and the GP surgery stamp be placed over your passport photo and also over the official stamp from them. So once you've had your documents authenticated, once you've had your medical check done, some of you won't have to do a medical check and will simply need to complete a form of disclosure. You'll need to apply for your initial work permit letter of notification. So you'll need to mail your collated and authenticated documents, medical check, passport photocopy, usually CV, sometimes other passport photos as well. Make sure you listen very carefully to what your HR contact at your school asks to send them to your school in China. They'll then take these documents to the local Public Security Bureau and the State Administration for Foreign Expert Affairs. At these departments, they will apply for your notification letter of foreigner's work permit in the People's Republic of China. The work permit will be emailed to you by your school, so it won't be mailed to you. It used to be that these were mailed to you, which took a little bit longer. This process will usually take around 3 to 4 weeks after the documents are sent. Sometimes it can take a little bit longer, so don't panic if it takes a little bit longer. At the same time, sometimes these can be turned around in about 2 weeks, but it's very rare for it to be done in any less time than that. Make sure you print out this notification letter once you receive it and keep it in a safe place, as this will be very important when you apply for your Z visa. And now, once you have got your notification letter from your partner school in China, you'll want to apply immediately to your nearest Visa for China centre. If you're in the United States, you'll still need to apply at the Chinese embassy. Make sure you check the conditions of application in your country. So again, go to visaforchina.org and go to their website and use the step-by-step guide to make sure that your application is going to be correct and you're going to bring everything you need with you. You'll also want to fill in the online application form and apply for an appointment at the visa centre, or again, if you're in the United States, at the embassy, but for the vast majority of you, at the visa centre. Now, for the Z visa for China, and indeed for all visas for China now, you will need to apply for your visa on the Visa for China website directly. So you'll want to complete an application form online. Now, these can be a little bit tricky, but the best way to do it is if you go to Quick Access and go to Visa, just here, and then go down, select New Application Form, ensure you agree with all the terms and conditions that are here, and you'll come to a page like this that asks you to put in all of your personal information. Now, when you're completing this form, there are a lot of options that are going to come up for you where you're going to need to go away to go and get something done, not least on the first page for personal information, which will require you to submit a photo. And they are quite pernickety about how that photo is displayed. So make sure that if you take a selfie in order to get it done, you take it against a white backdrop, as white as possible, and you don't have a shadow in it. But you'll likely need to go away from your computer in order to do that. Now, you can start a new application form and continue it. Just make sure you click the save button at the end of each page, where if you click a save button at the end of each page, it'll give you a little code. And when you go to continue an uncompleted application form, you can put in your application number and your passport number from when you've done that before as well. But make sure that you copy and paste that code into a little notebook or something that's going to be easy to come to hand for you to remember how to do that. The application form itself, once you get the hang of it, can be quite simple, but like I say, that initial page where it asks you for the photo is going to be something that you'll need to go away and do again, so make sure you save your application form number. Also, if you are using a Mac like I do, on the Visa for China website, a lot of the items autofill, so make sure you check each of the sections once you've completed it. So personal information, work information, to make sure that it hasn't auto-filled with something completely irrelevant, because once your application has been submitted, it can't be submitted again. So once you've completed your Z Visa application form online, make sure you bring all necessary documents as advised by the Visa for China Centre or your embassy to the Visa for China Centre or embassy. So again, make sure you check over those step-by-step guides when you're making your application. Bring with you a printed copy of your online application. It will give you the option to do this right at the end of your application. Make sure you get it printed out, and make sure you also get your appointment letter printed out as well. Make sure you bring with you a passport photo, usually take a spare with you as well, and also your work permit invitation letter. You'll be required to submit your fingerprints once you're there, and obviously make sure you bring your passport with you too. Now, at Visa for China centres and at embassies, sometimes there can be quite long waiting times. So if you book an appointment for 10 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock in the morning, don't be surprised if it takes you as long as 2 to 3 hours to get through that whole appointment process, as the queues can be quite long. So when you're going to the Visa Centre, make sure you bring a little snack with you and a drink as well, because it can be a little bit of a day out. The service usually takes between 3 to 4 days. You can have your passport actually mailed back to you with the visa inside as well, to save you a return trip to the Visa for China Centre, which I'm sure you'll be relieved to hear. Now, before you leave and after you receive your passport back from the Visa for China Centre with your Z visa in it, you'll want to make sure you have completed a few important final details. So, you'll want to make sure that you've booked your flights. Opportunity China work with STA Travel to offer those who are heading out to China as part of an Opportunity China program the chance to go out via flexible flights, where you can book an initial flight out and a flexible return. These are incredibly useful if there are going to be changing dates that will come in, and also, as many of you have flight reimbursements, they will cover the outward trip and return trip as well. It's also important that you ensure you pay for and download a VPN. So paying for and downloading a VPN is going to be a very important part of going to China. As you will no doubt now know, and as I will cover in much more detail in my Chinese culture session, China does have a rather large firewall that prevents those going to China from accessing various websites, including Facebook, including Twitter, Instagram, and a host of other sites as well. So you can go to the Opportunity China website, to our VPN section. Again, if you click on our slides when they're sent out for you, it will take you right to it. We work with ExpressVPN, which is the most reliable and most used VPN service for China for all of our teachers, and you can use that to gain a quick access to it and purchase a VPN. Make sure that your VPN has been purchased and make sure that your VPN is installed before you leave to go to China. One mistake that a lot of people often make is they will purchase their VPN but not install the software until they arrive in China. Obviously, VPN sites will be blocked, but it is an oversight that's very easy to make, so ensure you do that before you go. Also, make sure you check off everything from the Opportunity China packing list. So this will be sent out to you by your Opportunity China coordinator. It's a very useful list that includes a lot of vital things, so you can print that out, check them off as you go along. Make sure that you have travel insurance. Opportunity China work with Ensley Insurance to offer a full and comprehensive insurance plan, travel insurance plan for those going to China. Very often insurance will be local in China to your city or to the province where you are staying. So if you want insurance for traveling elsewhere in China, make sure you get that as well. It's important to download and install WeChat before you head out to China as well. This is really, really super important for keeping in contact with teachers who are going to be out there. WeChat is very much going to become your life when you arrive in China. It has a host of useful gadgets and useful add-ons to it, in addition to being a great instant messaging service. So make sure that's downloaded. Most importantly, don't forget to bring those vital documents, so your original and authenticated degree certificate. So all your original documents that you have, your degree certificate, your original TEFL certificate, and your original DBS or criminal record check. You'll need both of these and any authenticated copies that you have as well. It's much more important to make sure you have more than you need than less than you need. So make sure you take both the originals and the copies. So now we'll field any questions that you have on pre-departure sessions, on anything that you need to arrange before you go to China. Okay, Mark, I recently in November got my 10-year/60-day tourist visa for China. Does that help at all with possibly speeding up the process of the work visa? That's a really good question, Mark. Of course, sometimes having a visa previously to a country means that you've already had a lot of tests done, that they've already taken a look at who you are and what items and what background checks you've had done already. When it comes to China, the honest answer is I don't know. In terms of speeding things up, in all likelihood, it won't. It is a question that comes up on the application form for making a work visa application, as it does for any others. So they're likely going to look back at your previous visa. You'll need to put the previous visa number on your application form. But in all likelihood, it won't have a negative or positive effect. When you apply for your Z working visa, any other visas will be automatically cancelled. But the fact that you've been to China before will be something that needs to be put down. But in terms of speeding up the process, unfortunately, I don't think it will. And happy to take any other questions that we have just now. Harriet, how long would you say the entire document process will take? 8 weeks. What a good question that is. It really depends on how you are doing it. So there will be some people who will use a document authentication service where getting all of your documents done at once can take as few as 3 or 4 days. And if you have that done and then have your documents sent to China and that's done in 4 weeks, that'll only take about 4.5 weeks at that stage. Then going to get your visa done at the visa centre will probably be about another week on top of that with processing time and visiting time. So about 5 weeks or so. As a rule of thumb, we generally say between 6 to 8 weeks, but don't worry if it takes a little bit longer than that. If you have time to do it, and if you have a start date in the later future, we always recommend starting earlier and having a process that can sometimes take 8 to 12 weeks than rushing things and trying to get it all done in 4 to 6 weeks. Any other questions at all just at the moment? Okay, fantastic. Well, let's move on. So let's talk about arriving in China. Arriving in China is an incredibly important part for everyone's China journey. Whether you're coming to China for the very first time or whether you're returning to China, whether you're coming to a new city and have been to China before, you are all going to be experiencing something very new, arriving in China in order to live and work there for the first time. So what can you expect coming straight off the plane? Well, first of all, you can expect to be picked up and met by an HR representative at the airport or border crossing where you're going. For those of you who are going to be going to Shenzhen, you'll likely be arriving at Hong Kong International Airport and either taking the ferry or taking a transit to the Shenzhen border, so you'll be met there. For those of you who are flying into cities directly, you're going to be met at the airport by an HR representative from your school with a nice big board and your name on it as well. Again, if you're going to Shenzhen or if you are going to a location in Guangdong, some of you may have a slightly different process at the border. If you're going to other places in China, you'll have your Z visa in your passport. You'll simply show it to the security guard at immigration. They'll stamp it and you'll go through. If you're going to Shenzhen or other cities in Guangdong, such as Guangzhou, you may have different papers for crossing over at the border. You'll need to hand these papers over, and what they will do is they will transfer these papers into the Z working visa at the border for Guangdong and Shenzhen. This will take a little bit longer in all likelihood. Sometimes this can take about an hour. So again, don't worry if you're crossing over in the south in Guangdong, if the system is a little bit different from those entering China directly on the Z visa at the airport. You can expect your orientation after arrival. Usually upon arrival, you have a little bit of a quiet day where you'll get to relax, where you'll get some much needed rest. You'll sometimes be taken out for a nice meal. It depends really very much the time of day that you're in. But usually on the second, third, fourth day, it's going to be orientation time. So you'll be taken to your school, shown around. You'll be introduced to the city, taken to local supermarkets that are nearby, shown your nearest public transport stops. So whether these are metro stations or bus stations, you'll be introduced to how to download and use things like Didi, the Chinese equivalent of Uber. We'll be going into much more detail on these in our Chinese culture session, so don't worry if it seems like I'm very briefly skipping over a few of these things. And you'll also be introduced, importantly, to your colleagues, both Western and Chinese. Very often these first few days are quite fun. You go out quite a bit to meals and to bars and things as well, if that's your chosen place to go. Within the first few days, you'll also need to register at the local police station. You will have a registered address initially for when you arrive, whether this is going to be your hotel address or your apartment address upon arrival. You will have your bank account also sorted out during this time. So you'll go to a local Chinese bank with your HR representative. This is a really simple process. It takes less than an hour to do. You simply arrive, show your passport, show your visa, and they will take this and set up a bank account for you, hand you over a card. You'll give them a nominal amount of cash just to put in your account to get it started, and you're set up. You can use that card then across all range of platforms, as China is broadly within urban environments a cashless society now, so you can get those Chinese cards set up to your WeChat Pay, to your Alipay, so you'll be able to order food online to come to you. You'll be able to pay for things at stores just using your phone, and you'll also get your Chinese SIM set up at that time as well with your number and your monthly plan. Your monthly plan is actually done manually in China. You can either do it online using WeChat to pay maybe say 100 kuai each month into your Chinese SIM plan. That'll give you a certain amount of data. Or you can do it at a machine or a local branch of your Chinese network provider as well. Again, we'll go into more detail about Chinese network providers in our cultural webinar. You'll also have your in-China health check done during these first few days as well. Your in-China health check will be done in addition to your UK health check. It's very much a conveyor belt system. You will arrive at a local Public Security Bureau health centre and you'll have a series of checks done. You'll move from room to room. It's very efficient, but can seem a little bit intimidating when you do it for the very first time. You'll have a blood check done, you'll have a urine test done, you'll have x-rays done, you'll have an ultrasound done, and you'll have an eye test done as well during this time. Now, those of you who will be having their accommodation provided directly by their school will arrive and go straight to their accommodation in this time. Those of you who will be receiving an accommodation allowance will be put up in a hotel for the first couple of days whilst this is done. Will be taken out by an HR representative to see various different apartments. We'll go into a little more detail on apartments in a few moments, but essentially but what can you expect arriving in China? Well, you can expect massive size and scale, bright lights. You can expect a very large day-night disparity upon arriving in the country and a huge amount of noise, traffic and energy. For those of you like us who come from relatively sleepy cities and sleepy towns throughout the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, we are not so used to the scale that China exists on, and it can be quite overwhelming when you arrive in China for the first time. So getting used to this can be a little bit tough, and the first few nights you'll likely find with a mix of jet lag and also experiencing this much sensation, both audio, visual, smell and everything. It's going to be quite disjointing. So make sure you surround yourself by people for the first few days. Make sure you listen to advice from the HR professionals once you arrive. And also take time to go for a little walk, to go and explore where you're staying. Make sure that you set a little pin in a map to remember where you are going. We'll be talking about maps in our app session, in our Chinese culture session, but you'll want to use an app called Baidu Maps for it, so you don't forget where you live. But I really recommend familiarising yourself with your surroundings straight away as soon as you arrive. Getting out and about, seeing places that are nearby, and making yourself feel at home as soon as possible. Now, being a foreigner in China can feel like an intimidating experience. China has a population of 1.4 billion people. That is 1/5 of the world's population. And among those 1.4 billion, 92% of that population are Han Chinese. The vast majority of the other 8% of that population are Chinese minority or other East Asian minority ethnicities. So if you're from the West and you have a white skin colour, a black skin colour, a brown skin colour, that is going to elicit a certain amount of curiosity from people in a country that is so homogenous. It will also become very evident as well that there are very different social and political models that exist in China. This curiosity is broadly very, very positive. It's important for me to mention as well. China is a country that is open, where it is encouraged for their country to be open to foreigners. And for many people, particularly in second and third tier cities in the country, it's actually very exciting to have a foreigner come to their town or to their city for the very first time. And you'll find yourself becoming almost a bit of a minor celebrity. Very often, students will want to take pictures with you. People will want to have selfies done. I remember for the very first time I was in China, I got on a tube and I noticed just across at the other end, someone was taking a very sneaky picture of me there. And this kind of curiosity really is quite rife when you first arrive in China. So if you're a shy, retiring type, you're going to need to get used to being a little bit of a centre of attention. Now, as I mentioned, there are very different social and political models that exist in China. So using a large amount of discretion when it comes to sensitive subjects and topics is very highly advised. But there are a lot of expat communities in which you can have those more familiar conversations. But being a foreigner in China, it's important to throw yourself in, to get used to the hospitality that's going to be shown to you, and to really try to immerse yourself in it. If you want to talk about things, about politics, about things that might be a little more critical of China, it's very often better to keep those quiet and within the expat communities. Always be aware of what you're saying, and always be aware that even though you're living there, you are very much still a guest in the country. Here's a few typical do's and don'ts for China. Gift giving is a massive part of Chinese culture. So when you arrive, you might find that students and parents and teachers and colleagues will give you little gifts. In China, it is said that you're strangers until you give a gift to one another, and then you're friends. So preparing a few nice little gifts that are maybe typical from your country, maybe things like little bits of shortbread, or even things like Marmite, funny little idiosyncratic things that you might associate with Britain, are very popular for Chinese colleagues when you arrive. And just adding those nice little touches really can put you in the good books. China is very homogenous in terms of its ethnicity, but in terms of its culture, it can be quite different. There are very big north-south differences in China. So looking at China from a very blanket point of view is quite wrong. One of the biggest differences is, of course, the weather. In the south of China, you're going to find that it's going to be very hot all year round. You're going to go there in December to places like Shenzhen or Guangzhou and be in the mid-20s to early 30 degrees Celsius, whereas those of you who are going to be right up north in Beijing, or even those of you in Shenyang, are going to be well into the minus degrees. But there are also different attitudes in the north and south to certain things. We'll be talking about this more in our culture webinar on Wednesday. But people in the north can be much more direct than people in the south. There's very much a cultural theme in the north of being very direct, to the point of it sometimes seeming rude, but people are just very direct with one another and will tell you what they think of something and give you a very straight answer. Whereas in the south of China, there's sometimes a little more of a tendency to not really know when someone has said no to you. In the south in China, people tend not to like to say no, and you go on a little bit of a journey around an answer that's given to you. Again, we'll be talking a little bit more about this in our culture webinar. Again, like I say, it's important to avoid things like political conversations with Chinese unless you know them very well and they initiate these kinds of conversations. Very much stray away from these sensitive kinds of subjects and topics once you're there. If you do it, people in black aren't going to come and take you away and put you in jail forever, but people will begin to feel uncomfortable with it, and it's very much not the norm. People in China are very sensitive to national criticism as well. And sometimes you can think of national criticism as being simply saying, oh, the tube was rubbish today in London. In China, sometimes coming over and criticising certain things that as a communitarian country they see as having been built together can be a little bit sensitive. So again, being very careful when you're being critical in China of certain things is very important. There are very different taboos in China. So in China, much like in Japan, in households, very often people will not wear their shoes. It's quite disrespectful to wear your shoes in the house, and you'll actually wear slippers. But likewise, it's actually quite disrespectful to go barefoot in a house. So make sure you remember to pop your slippers on. That's a mistake that I very often make. Also make sure that you don't put your feet up on anything. In China, it can be considered quite rude to actually blow your nose in public as well. So if you want to blow your nose, try and do that in private or do it secretively. Whereas in China, there are certain other taboos that simply aren't there. In the north of China, it's very typical for people just to spit. If you go out in public, you'll see people spitting on the pavement. Again, in the north of China, it can not be taboo to ask very direct questions. Indeed, in all of China, it's certainly not taboo to ask what your salary is. So be very prepared for people to ask you questions like that. And it's also important to note the importance of food in China. Food is vitally important. Food is the be-all and end-all. It is where all social occasions begin and end. If people ask you out, if a colleague or if a new Chinese friend asks you for a meal, they'll always ask you out of a sense of hospitality. Make sure you say you can't the first time and say you can the third time they ask you. Deny them twice and accept the third time. That means they really, really do want to take you for food. If you go for food with them, you'll notice it all arranged on a very large table. People will be talking a lot. People will be cheering and gambaying and drinking. Again, it's a very different atmosphere to a restaurant atmosphere in Britain. The closest thing you can describe it to would be a sort of night out in the pub, the way in which meals are treated in China. Now, we're going to take a look at apartments. So there's a very short apartment tour here that one of our Teach China Graduate Programme 2019 participants, Tommy, does for us. I will keep the sound off for this one, but just talk a little bit about it so you can get a little bit of an idea of what an apartment would look like in a first-tier city in China. So, Tommy's apartment is actually based in Shenzhen. So Shenzhen is one of the most expensive places to live and work in the whole of China. So for the vast majority of those of you who are going to be living and working in Shenzhen, your apartment will either be a shared apartment with another 2 or 3 teachers, or it'll likely be quite a small studio apartment, as Tommy's is here. So Tommy's apartment is in very central Shenzhen. If you're going to be living in Shenzhen, you're going to notice that everything is super modern. So in your apartment building, you're likely not going to have any keys. You're going to have a little app on your phone to open the doors, and you'll have either a fingerprint password for your door, or you'll have a code password, as you can see on the screen here that Tommy does just there. So it's almost quite futuristic, these apartments that you live in. These studio apartments, if you're going to be in a city like Shenzhen, generally have a small kitchenette. They'll usually have provided for you a washing machine. Sometimes they'll be rented out, usually for the equivalent of only about £5 or £2.50 per month if you need to pay for that in addition. There'll generally be space for your bed, for a desk for you to work, for wardrobes and for bits and pieces like that as well. You will, if you're living in the centre of the city, have, like I say, a little bit smaller living conditions than those of you who are going to be living in second or third tier cities, or those of you a little bit outside of the very centre. So that gives you just a little bit of an idea of what some of the accommodation in very central areas of tier 1 cities might look like. But of course, if you are a little bit further out, it might be a bit different to that. So happy to take any questions now for arrival in China. Luke, how common are squat toilets? Again, a very, very good question there. Squat toilets can be quite common. It's going to depend very much where you're going to be based. Those of you who are going to be based in very modern cities like Shenzhen, they're considerably less common. Those of you who are going to be in slightly older cities, say like Foshan, they're going to be a little more common. But it very much depends on where you are in the city as well. If you're going to be shopping or working in or near a fancy new mall, the toilets will pretty much all be Western style, very fancy, very nice. If you are going to a public toilet just out and around on the street, they will most commonly be squat toilets, just public toilets that you're going to pass. If you're working in a public school or a kindergarten, the toilets are likely going to be squat toilets as well. I will say they can be a little bit of a challenge at first, but honestly, you do get used to them, and it's certainly a cultural experience beginning to use them. Your apartments will all have Western-style toilets, so don't worry about needing to have a squat toilet in your apartment. That absolutely will not be the case. But what I would say is, no matter where you are in China, you are going to need to, out of necessity, use a squat toilet at some point. So it's better to, for want of a better phrase, dive in at the deep end and start using them as soon as you arrive. Any other questions just at the moment? Okay, in which case, let's move on and talk a little bit about culture shock. So, not everything in China is arriving, feeling excited, getting used to new things, and using squat toilets. There are certain challenges that come with living and working in China. But those challenges can be quite hard to see upon first arriving in the country. A lot of this is due to the honeymoon stage of culture shock, the first stage of culture shock that you will experience. The honeymoon stage It's the point in which you arrive. You see bright lights, you see energy within the city, you see a huge amount going on, the hustle and bustle of a tier 1, tier 2 Chinese city. Everything around you is new. You're trying new food, you're making new friends, you're seeing this huge level of energy and enjoying absolutely all the sights and sounds that surround you. It feels almost like you're on a prolonged holiday, like an extended holiday where you're going to be there for much longer. And everything seems incredibly exciting, interesting, or a lot of the time very funny. A lot of the differences will be hilarious to you. And you'll feel a certain sense of euphoria as all of those endorphins kick in at being in a new place and seeing this bright, long future of a year ahead of you, of this super exciting time there. Everything is so cool and interesting and new and funny and occasionally frustrating, but you're having this great adventure on this great holiday, and most of all, everything is so cheap. All of this food is amazingly cheap. You can go out and eat dinner every single night for about £2 or £3. You can get a pint down your local bar or pub for £1. It is so cheap and so easy to access, and like I say, like an extended holiday. But then you'll slowly begin to become slightly frustrated with your surroundings. There'll be a fatigue of not understanding the language, a fatigue, a frustration of needing to use gestures. Maybe even though you're having lessons, you feel you're not learning Chinese fast enough, or you feel people are going to be judging you each day. You might begin to feel a loss of self-esteem as you're walking around in this country where everyone is so different, where people just don't do things the way you're used to them doing it. And it feels like you're doing it wrong. There becomes a frustration of your surroundings, where you might switch day to day from feeling like you're doing everything wrong to China is doing everything wrong, this country is wrong. And it can feel very, very annoying. You can get angry and frustrated with the smallest thing, from someone not understanding what you're saying, to a taxi driver taking the long way round and you thinking that they're conning you when they're trying to describe to you in Chinese that actually there's a traffic jam that they're going away from. Small incessant things can start to bother you, and the fast pace of China can become very chaotic. And within a small expat population, where everyone is in the same boat and experiencing this new culture, small little grievances and falling outs can be heightened to enormous dramas. It's very much like high school or secondary school, where little friendship groups have bickerings, but to a massive extreme and among adults. These small friendship groups can become very tense. But most of all, and the biggest kicker that gets you in the frustration stage, is homesickness. Homesickness is enormous. And homesickness can come in very quickly. That honeymoon stage can last a week for some people. It can last 4 months for some people, as can the frustration stage. Everyone experiences these stages of culture shock via different timelines. But homesickness can be something that can hit you on very early. Even if you've not been away for very long, the feeling of knowing you're going to be away can be enormous. So it's always massively important that no matter how frustrated or irritated you might find hanging around with other expats because you see them so much, you keep your friends around you, your Chinese friends, your expat friends. Go out and do something different with different people each day, but stick with someone else. Go for a walk with one person if you're irritated with someone else, and go to the park. Arrange a day out at a theme park with a group of people if you're all arguing, and make friends again. These are the best things for combating homesickness. The best things for combating homesickness is forgetting all about home and enjoying things together and supporting each other. What you'll find very quickly, especially among expats who have been there a little bit longer, is they are so willing to help you with absolutely any questions that you have and any problems you have, because they have all been there and been in that boat. The worst thing you can do is not speak to anyone. Speaking to people, especially other foreign teachers, is massively important, as they will have all been through that process as well. Then there's the adjustment stage. The adjustment stage will come in, again, like I say, 1 or 4 weeks of a frustration, one week to 4 months for a frustration stage. The adjustment stage will begin to come in. Those frustrations will begin to feel more subdued. You'll start to forget about them a little bit more. You'll start to acclimatise to the pace and cultural differences. It might still exhaust you and you'll go home at the end of the day falling asleep straight away, but it no longer seems as though it's almost unbearable for you. You'll begin to pick up more of the language and begin to feel a little more confident in how things are going. And again, this isn't dependent on how much of the language you pick up. It's dependent on how much of the language you pick up that you're comfortable with. There are some people in China who learn just a few phrases and get by with that and they feel comfortable in that. And there are some people who learn a huge amount and never really feel comfortable because they feel they need to learn more and more and more and more. But finding a level that you're comfortable with is very important. You'll have established a regular routine both inside and outside of work. This is very important because routine is what makes you feel more at home and is an important factor for combating homesickness in and of itself. Finally, you'll reach the acceptance stage where you'll have become familiar with the cultural differences that you're going to experience. Of course, there are going to be certain things that might be frustrating from time to time, but you're very comfortable with your language level, your ability. You've got an established social group, and very importantly, you feel established at work. Whereas previously you might have been frustrated thinking, I can't teach, these classes are horrible. It will pass. Everyone will have for the first few weeks horrible nightmare classes of children that won't necessarily behave. But this will pass and you'll feel more established as you go on. And finally, China will begin to feel a bit more like a home to you. Now, once you've reached the acceptance stage and once China feels more like a home to you, you'll find that culture shock plateaus a little bit and China life becomes normal daily life. Now, if you stay there for a year, it can be quite an overcoming experience for it. I stayed in China for over 3 years, and what I can say is you experience a degree of reverse culture shock on the way back. When you come back to your home country, you'll notice a much slower pace of life. Everything seems uneventful and mundane. Changes at home also seem stark and sudden, personal changes that are happening in other people's lives, in your family's lives, in your friends' lives. But the changes actually in the environment seem weirdly numb and stilted because everything is changing in China every day. You have a feeling sometimes that you've been left behind, and it can be difficult re-establishing a social life. Now, arriving back in your home country from China, I would always recommend not using friends back home, speaking on WeChat, speaking via Skype, or your parents as a crutch. But keeping in contact with them every week or every month or so is incredibly important as well. I was certainly guilty of not doing that and arriving back at home and kind of realising and feeling, it feels like everyone's forgotten me. It's really important each week and each month to keep in contact with people and make sure you know what's happening and make sure they know what's happening with you and in your life. So you still feel part of that and so you can help better yourself against that reverse culture shock of coming home. Now, does anyone have any questions on culture shock? Okay, fantastic. Well, tomorrow we're going to be taking a look at a guide to teaching in China, where we are going to be covering the education system in China, what to expect in a classroom, what standards are expected of teachers in China. We're also going to be taking a look at some testimonials from our previous teachers and their experience of teaching in China for the first week and for the very first time. We'll be taking a look at tests. We'll be taking a look at some of the most common problems that teachers will face and some of the most common behavioural issues that exist in China, and looking at the ins and outs of workplace politics as well. Now, before we finish, does anybody have any final questions? That's a really good question there, Harriet. That's a very, very good question. So is homosexuality taboo in China, as I have a lot of gay friends? I will actually be talking about this more in our Chinese culture session, but I'm very happy to answer this question as well. So homosexuality in China. China is a somewhat more socially conservative state than many countries in the Anglosphere West. However, homosexuality is certainly not illegal. Homosexuality is certainly not frowned upon if people say they are gay. Shows of outward affection in China, whether you are gay or straight, are sometimes frowned upon or looked down upon. So whether that's a man and a woman holding hands, a man and a man holding hands, or a woman and a woman holding hands. In a broader sense, I would say avoid public displays of affection. It certainly won't result in anything violent or anything like that happening. But it is a little bit taboo to have those sort of public displays of affection. And again, as China is a little more socially conservative, it can feel a little more taboo having public displays of affection between a man and a man or a woman in China. But there's certainly no outward discrimination, certainly no violent discrimination. There's a little bit more of an un-PC culture in China with a certain macho culture of sort of lads as they would have done 10 or 15 years ago in the UK, calling each other gay being quite a common thing in China. But there's no violent or negative perceptions. I have a lot of gay Chinese friends who are very happily open about being gay, but it does work a little bit different. And I'm worried about social media. So social media in China, like I say, social media in China is very different. Facebook and Twitter are behind the Great Firewall, but again, you can access them via a VPN. Now, social media in China is monitored by the government. So, like I mentioned, when making comments in public, you're not going to get taken away by people in black suits if you say something that's a little bit contentious. But you should be aware of where you are and be aware of sensitivities, cultural sensitivities that exist in the country. So even if you're using Facebook or Twitter, be very careful about what you put on there. It's never advisable to put negative things about the country in which you're saying and social media and things like that. But if you've had a really bad day, it might feel sort of tempting to do so. Do refrain from doing that. But using social media like Facebook and Twitter, if you are a foreigner in China and using a VPN, is absolutely fine. You are not going to get in trouble for doing that. Do just use some discretion about what you might post. How are tattoos considered in China? Esther, really good question. A lot of Chinese have tattoos. Now, about 10 or 15 years ago, tattoos were incredibly uncommon in China. Very, very few people used to have them. And much like in Japan, tattoos used to be considered a symbol of organised crime, a symbol of triad and mafia. But this has changed a huge amount in the last 10 to 15 years among youth culture in China. You will find tons of people in their early 20s and 30s in China with tattoos on their arms. But what I would say is when you are teaching in school, there is still a conservative dress sense, and you will want to cover up any tattoos to your best of your ability as you can. So if you're wearing a short sleeve shirt, having a long sleeve glove or something, if you have a tattoo on your lower arm or around your wrist, making sure you cover up your legs if you have tattoos on your legs as well. If tattoos are showing, usually it's not too bad, but again, like I say, there is more conservative dress sense when it comes to tattoos in China when you're teaching. If you're outside and just going out and around, don't worry about it. A lot of young people have tattoos in China, but just being careful when you're teaching. Any other questions just at all? Okay, lovely. Well, I would just like to finish off just by apologising again for the start of our stream. YouTube is using a different streaming service at the moment, which is a little bit new to us, and this was the first time we were using it today, so I do apologise for the disruption just at the start of the stream, and hope that didn't bother you all too much, but we will certainly have it figured out a little bit better and be able to use all our videos tomorrow and make sure things run a little bit smoother. But thank you all very much for tuning in, and look forward to hopefully seeing many of you in our webinar tomorrow. Thank you very much and goodbye.